to talking about very important issues. We had a chance to speak about regional order after 7th of October, about late of November 2023. This is the second event going to address the role of global actors in the gas crisis and its aftermath. Considering more than 6 months, more than 5 months, and we are reaching actually to the 6 months past since the crisis in Gaza started. And we believe that creating this kind of platform for dialogue and expert diplomacy or intellectual diplomacy can help us to better understand the issues and maybe have a little chance to providing a better solution for all the participants and the actors in the field. And therefore, G going to address the Gaza crisis and its aftermath and focus on the role of United States, European Union, China, and Russia. The four panel these four actors actually we are calling the U.S. as a challenging road toward election 2024. China, we can call it a kind of newcomer into the region and arrangement. EU have a kind of a dichotomy between divisions and confusion, and Russia about beyond near abroad, as they mention it in their documents. Therefore, in doing so, we had a chance to hosting about 9 distinguished guests and experts from all over the world. In today's program, we would have Dr. Let me check the name. Okay, in today's program, we have a chance to benefit from the remarks of Professor Hossein Bakshi as a Turkish academic, author, and the former president of the Foreign Policy Institute. He's also professor at METU, Faculty of Economy and Administration Science. Mr. Fyodor Lukyanev, as a researcher, director of Foundation and Development for the Support of Wildlife Discussion Club. Dr. Shushu Zhang, as an associated professor at the School of International Relations and Public Affairs of Fudan University. Professor David Miller, as a non-resident senior researcher fellow at Center of Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul, and of course, Dr. Bing, director of Center of Middle Eastern Studies at the Peking University. I think in today's program we also can benefit from the Dr. Sultania's remark. Also, his panel is tomorrow, but he have a very kind attitude toward our program, and we will have a chance to speak about all these debates. If you let me, not losing any more time, and try to address the main issue, I will ask every participant, actually our panelists, to raise their points and remarks for the first round in a very, uh, short introductory for about 15 minutes, and try to address the preference of this kind of global power, as we know in international relation and futurology. These trends and preferences really will shape probably the future, and it will help us to better understanding the situation. If you let me, I will ask Professor Hossein Bakshi to start the session as the senior professor in our gathering. Good to see you again, Doctor. Floor is yours. Sorry, we can't hear you. You should enable your microphone. You can find the bottom in the top left of
Yes,
the.
I did. Now you listen? Perfect.
Yes,
First,
yes, yes.
first of all, best regards also to my dear friend Fyodor Lukyanov. A long time no see, but I follow his writings and talks, and also to Madame Chuchu Zhang. I think it will be very important to understand now what happens in Gaza and what will be the future in the Middle East. My my statements from the very beginning was Hamas has done wrong, Israel has done wrong, and two wrongs do not make one right. So it is, I would say, the Zeitenwende, what Olaf Scholz said in 2002 after the Russian attack to Ukraine. Zeitenwende is also, we can use since 7th of October for the Middle East. So we have two hot points now, which is going to be solved, but very difficult to solve them soon. The negotiations continue, but in the Middle East, that Hamas is now trying to negotiate with Israel, and Israel's policy is, to my view, also a very complicated one. In the very first couple of days, the entire world was on the side of Israel, supporting Israel's position because Hamas attack was targeted the civilians, people mostly, and they got a lot of prisoners. But later on, when Israel continued to have this operation, which is still going on, it created a big debate internationally, not only in international organizations, but international public opinion is also now getting more and more against Netanyahu government's policies, which cannot be accepted neither from humanitarian point of view or moral point of view, you name it. In our eyes, the people, the civilians are bombed, which is against the existing international law, actually. And the government of Israel will have difficulties in future. What we have seen here from Ankara, again, my analysis is that the Turkish position from the very beginning was actually trying to become a mediator between two sides. It is wrong to think that Turkey is only now supporting Palestinian issue. It is not true. Turkey is, since 1978, supporting a Palestinian issue. And we have a Palestinian ambassador here in this country. And Turkey was very much hopeful in 2006 when Hamas won the elections in Gaza. Even at that time, I wrote an article whether Hamas will be successful to have a democratic system because they came via democratic elections, or whether they would fail. To my understanding, in democratic tradition, Hamas failed. So there's no doubt about it. And I wrote also before that Hamas is using Turkey as a springboard. It is that Hamas is an organization, non-state organization, having a military structure. It is not to be accepted, of course, also by Turkish side. Turkey was, before Tayyip Erdogan's government, also very much critical to Israel. But everything, I would say, that Turkey has done, in Turkey, we have also a very critical position towards Hamas policies. The government is saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Tayyip Erdogan organized a big gathering protest in Istanbul. He was taking the steam off the people because Turkey morally and also from the very beginning very sensitive to Middle East developments. But the majority of the people in Turkey, they say it is not Turkish business. It is Arab-Israeli conflict. It is Hamas-Israeli conflict, and it is not Turkey's problem. But Turkey, by the Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and President Erdogan's statements, Turkey was from the very beginning to play a role as arbitrator, like in the case of Russian-Ukrainian war. But Hamas does not want Turkey to become an arbitrator. This is something which we have to take into account. Who has taken the role? Qatar. Qatar is now the place where the negotiations go. The Turkish-Israeli relations have been improving in the last couple of years. Even just 1.5 years ago, the Israeli president was in Turkey. Last year in September, Netanyahu and Turkish president met in the United Nations yearly conference, and they made jokes. They had similar ties and shirts, you know, and Turkey was expecting the visit of Netanyahu. He was not coming in the first, canceled, and then in the Turkish expectation finished when attack started. What is interesting here in the Turkish position in the Middle East, I think the Turkish position there is to support the peace process. The meetings in Riyadh, in Cairo, proved it, and I do not think that Turkey is now directly one of the most important players there. But Turkey has great interest, of course, that the Gaza issue is solved, and trying to support financially, humanitarian aid, Turkey is providing. But I must say here one point for the further discussion. President Erdogan criticizes Netanyahu government, not Israel. So it's very interesting. In 2009, when Turkey had a problem with Israel in Davos, when he was leaving Davos meeting, because Shimon Peres and they were in the same panel, and the Turkish-Israeli relations deteriorated. But then in the last couple of years, there was a great improvement. Also, Israel's improvement with the Gulf countries, the so-called Abraham Accords, Turkey welcomed, and Turkey even today has very good relations with the United Arab Emirates. And in January, I was in United Arab Emirates with my team. We had very good discussions, and I think the Gulf countries mostly are against Hamas policies. They do not accept Hamas, like China is also not accepting this, and some friends maybe have been in Doha meeting in December. I was also in Doha meeting where we listened to Lindsey Graham, United Nations Secretary General, and of course it was a evolving process, Hamas-Israel conflict. Where it will lead, I don't know. Even now we have Ramadan, and still the conflict goes on. It is very difficult. Turkey is, to my view, the Turkish government's policies is now also trying to be a side player, not the main player. The main player is, of course, the United States of America. If America would stop Netanyahu government, they can. But there is another discussion. Maybe we go, who is pressing whom? Netanyahu, Biden administration, or Biden administration, Netanyahu? It is a question which we have to answer. Last but not least, maybe in this respect, I think time is over. Looking from Turkey, from Ankara, as an independent view, I think the Turkish interest in the Middle East, of course, will be always there. Turkey is one of the so-called modernized middle power in the Middle East, not only in Israel, but also in Syria, in Libya, and the Turkish-Egyptian relations, that it is improved, and probably in April, Mr. President Sisi will come to Turkey. It will have also a new dynamism, I would say, in the Middle East. The dynamism in the Middle East, the actors in the Middle East will define whether there will be a sustainable peace or not. But whatever it is, I would say Israel's government, Netanyahu government, has taken the word against itself, despite the fact, and they are the last words for now, the European countries have been unconditionally supporting from the very beginning Israel's policy. But Spain is changing now. 9 of October, just 2 days after attacks, Hamas attack to Israel, we had Euromesco conference in Madrid. And the representative of Madrid government during the opening of the conference stated, we unconditionally support as European Union Israel's policies. Now they change it. They changed. So when the problem started, when attack started, we had totally different world perspective towards Israel, towards Netanyahu's policy, as it is the case. Now, I think Netanyahu is losing now more and more legitimacy for his policies. But he has, of course, the support of America, and none of the countries, neither the Arab countries nor Turkey or any other regional country, is at the moment able to be against Israel militarily. So politically, morally, definitely there is a very strong reaction in the societies globally. It is not only in Turkey, but globally. And the question will be how the Israelis or Jewish people who live in other countries will be feeling secure in their countries if this policy continues. So far, I would say the other regional countries, Iran, for example, or Egypt, and the Islamic Conference, Arab League, how they will try to develop policies towards Israel is something to be remaining to be seen. And it's why I'm also learning now from this meeting how my dear friends from Russia and China and the others will see where do we go from now. Thank you very much.
And just checking for about this kind of atrocities. If I think everybody is, most of the people are against this kind of atrocities, but maybe in the next round we can try to reach about the preferences of Turkey as a major actor, at least in the region, and or your perception about how the, for example, the United States or other global powers see the, as you mentioned, the dynamics of the region. If you let me, then go to the Mr. Fyodor Lukyanov to presenting the remarks, his remarks. The floor is yours, sir. In 15 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try to be even shorter because, frankly, I'm not a big specialist in the Middle East, and I try to look at what is happening in Palestine and around from the point of view of course, Russian foreign policy, which is, frankly, just now easier, and a little bit from the point of view of global conjunction and what is happening, what place this situation has in the world. So I will try to make 2 points about that. Let's start with the Russian position. The Russian position, to be frank with you, is pretty clear in the sense that Russian Federation has now one priority in all of its policies, which is overwhelmingly more important than everything else. And this is not the Middle East. This is not Palestine. This is Ukraine. We see different kinds of dynamism in this war and in this conflict. My personal assessment, as for now, by the way, we have 3 days from now, we have presidential election in Russia. There is no big enigma who will win, but there is a slightly bigger question what kind of policies will be conducted after, the same or slightly different, but that will be we will see. But regardless this situation, I think the Ukrainian Ukrainian story will move into the next and pretty dangerous stage, because after different phases in this conflict, we see now Russia slowly but steadily taking over, taking a lead in this conflict. And the question is, what will be the reaction on the American side, and in particular on the European side, if the possibility will emerge that Russia will simply win this conflict militarily, by military means. So I'm not sure what will happen in this situation. So far, we hear a lot of pretty interesting statements from European capitals, not so much from the United States, but from Paris, from Berlin, and that's quite. I think it's a pretty risky period we're entering. But this is another story. What as far as the Palestine is concerned, Russian position is pretty clear from the beginning. Russia has official relationship with Palestine and recognizes Palestine as a state since very, very long time, since the Soviet Union. And in this regard, Russia has always been advocating the fair and just solution of the Palestinian issue, the two-state solution, and so on, more or less in the same line as the international community did before the latest development. At the same time, as we know, Russian relationship with Israel has been significantly improved after collapse of the Soviet Union. And those 30 years, this relationship developed pretty successfully. I would say more on the humanitarian level, on the level of people to people, because significant part of Israeli population now has roots in Russia or in the Soviet Union. But also, I think the relationship between leaderships, especially between Putin and Netanyahu, has been pretty good for one simple reason. Not because they saw things in the same light, but I think they understood each other very well. They understood each other very well from the point of view that both leaders are, how to say it elegantly, very much realist-minded, and they believe in force, in power, as an ultimate mean to address serious security questions. And in this regard, again, it did not mean mutual agreement about what should be done in the Middle East, and more than that, Russia and Israel mostly were on different sides of barricades, and Israel is a very close ally of the United States and so on. But the understanding of security as something which should be preserved and guarded by almost any means, that was what unified Netanyahu and Putin, I would say, psychologically, and in terms of philosophy of how foreign policy and security policy should be conducted. What we saw after October the 7th, as Hussein Bakshi rightly pointed out, the initial reaction was everywhere, including Russia, rather pro-Israeli, because the atrocities made by initial attack by Hamas were perceived in a very negative light, of course. But then we arrived to the situation when, on the one hand, Israeli response got to be that disproportionate that it created a lot of doubts, to put it mildly, a lot of doubts everywhere. I would say less in Russia, because in Russia we understand that any military response actually is disproportionate. To be, so to say, to be realistic, any response to the attack used to be quite powerful, maybe more powerful than attack everywhere. But of course, what we saw in case of Palestine and Gaza, that was too big, so to say. At the same time, and here we connect the Ukrainian crisis to the Palestine crisis, of course, for Russian Federation, this conflict is being seen through the lenses how it can influence our situation in Ukraine and the outside world's perception of Ukraine. And here we see that on the one hand, our opponents, I mean in the United States, first of all, their attention has been distracted because of Gaza, because of Israeli campaign. On the other hand, the relationship with the Arab world and broader with the Muslims and the Muslim world mostly is obviously on the side of Palestinians. This relationship at this point, at this moment, is that important for Russia that obviously the wish to strengthen relationship with the Muslim world based on common understanding of the Gaza situation was very important from the point of view of general Russian posturing in the world affairs. That made Israel extremely sad and almost furious because from the point of view of Israeli leadership and Netanyahu, especially Netanyahu personally, Israel before that was extremely flexible and cautious, rejecting American calls to join anti-Russian sanctions, just because Israel believed that Russian role in the Middle East was too big and tried to, so to say, to make an equilibrium, a balancing act. Israel didn't support Russian action in Ukraine, but didn't want to destroy relationship with Russia completely. And they perceived Russian position on Palestine, which was highly critical against Israel, as a treason. So they saw that Russia betrayed, so to say, their goodwill. We can debate it. I think that in this complicated relationship, everybody tried to pursue its own interest. But anyway, and what is important now, I think, Russia is trying to, being almost entirely on the side of Palestinians, Russia is trying to be instrumental in terms of to organize, for example, inter-Palestinian dialogue to restore or to help to restore some kind of mutual understanding between Hamas and Palestinian Authority, and to involve all factions of the Palestine movement. It was a meeting, I think, a week ago in Moscow, which was officially called a very successful one. But it was really quite a fruitful discussion. Meanwhile, Israel, being extremely negative about Russian position, is of course moving towards clearly pro-Western, pro-American stance on Russia. And I think after this conflict in Gaza will be completed more or less in one or another way, Israel will probably join anti-Russian sanctions to finally demonstrate on which side they are, which I think is quite clear. And here, Russian actions, I don't expect Russia to be very active on this conflict, but I think that Russia, as it happened before a couple of times in different regional constellations, Russia will try to be useful, be it interaction between different Palestinian factions, or probably coordination with other regional players. So to what extent it might be successful, I fail to judge. I don't know. And now, very shortly, the second point, which I think is very important. It's not about Russia. It's about general situation. I'm pretty gloomy about what we saw. I don't mean atrocities only. That was terrible enough. But what is, from my point of view, much worse is that actually, after everything what happened, first the Hamas attack, then the terrible response of Israel, and all this noise and statements by everybody, by Turkish president, by our Arab leaders, by Americans, by Russians, but nothing changed. Let us be frank, nothing changed. We are back. I had a feeling at the beginning that now it was, however terrible it is, but at least it is a turning point towards something new, because we cannot ignore it anymore. We should, regional players, global players, should seek for some new ideas, new solutions. What we see now, nothing. We see that everybody is actually waiting when Israel will be fine to stop it. They didn't achieve goals they wanted. Of course, they will proclaim victory at the end, but in fact, I think this conflict demonstrated all limitations of the contemporary war. You cannot achieve what you want by military means, even if you have an enemy which is much weaker than you, or maybe even because of that. And then politically, we see that everybody is just looking, watching. We see no new initiatives. We see some kind of behind the scene, behind the closed doors, secret diplomacy, how to get back to what we had before, between Arab countries and between Gulf countries in Israel, between Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, between United States and Gulf countries, and so on. It's not up to me to judge whether it's good or bad. I think probably it's a real politics. It happens in this way. But I think it's extremely discouraging what we see, that such an enormous, terrible tragedy which happened actually didn't change anything. And we see actually total inaction and total inability of anybody to do anything or even to propose anything. And that's for the time being, that's the main conclusion.
Thank you for your remarks. I think it's really important that how you can see from the Moscow point of view to the whole situation. We can talk about the proportionality, and as international relations students, I think there is to believe in a kind of relative world, and every scale is kind of relative, and it's hard to find the absolute criteria. But the main point is nothing changed. Maybe we can talk about in the next round that there is a lack of intention, will, or there is a lack of good initiative. Maybe this kind of dialogue could help us to find us this kind of things. Our next panelist, Dr. Shushu Zhang, are you with us? Can you enable your webcam? Hello, ma'am. Good to see you.
Hello, Ali. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You have about 15 minutes to talk about how China see the situation. What is its preference? As we, at least in a public attitude, see China as a newcomer to the decision making of the region. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I would say that right now what's going on in the Middle East has a great impact on China because as we see along with the increasing role of China and increasing economic interest of China in the region, you will find that actually China is very concerned with the Middle Eastern issues. So first of all, right now the Middle East is not only important just as a energy supplier of China, but also is an investment target and cooperation partner of us. So right now, China has lots of interest in the Middle East, both in Israel and in Palestine. And the tricky part is actually China has more commercial interests with Israel, right? But at the same time, although it doesn't have many economic interests in Palestine itself, it has lots of interest in the Arab world. So right now it's concerned both with the safety of its citizens and its economic interests. And second, the conflict has placed China in a very difficult situation because according to the foreign policy principle, it's like China doesn't want to take sides. But during the conflict, it's like everybody is asking and judging China as like, are you like taking the side with this or that? So China right now is very hard for it. And also the tricky part is that when you say you support the cause of Palestinian statehood, people may interpret it as if you support Hamas. But actually, China never says that it supports Hamas. And the third issue is that geopolitical landscape in the Middle East may be more complicated because it's like last year at the very beginning, everybody was talking about Saudi. So is it that it's going to be better and better and development is the first priority? But right now it's like everybody is like Professor Fyodor has just mentioned, like the situation is becoming gloomy. And fourth, I think that China is also concerned about the relationship between Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Palestine-Israel conflict. Well, is the Palestine-Israel conflict going to affect Russia-Ukraine war, for instance? Because right now it's like everybody in Europe is talking about Israel, then it doesn't mean that more aid is going to come to Israel rather than Ukraine. So China is concerned about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine as it's related to its own neighborhood. And last but not least, we have to keep in mind that there are lots of spillover effects of the ongoing Palestine-Israel conflict. And it's not just about Palestine and Israel, but also a lot of other actors are involved. So for instance, China is a big victim of the Red Sea crisis because once the navigation in the Red Sea is disrupted, it has a great impact on our overseas commercial interests. And right now, a lot of businessmen are complaining about the rise of the transportation fees and insurance costs. So right now, a lot of people
are not the only one. You are not the only one, I can tell you. You are not the only one.
Yeah, that is true. And also, a lot of people are asking the question of what roles China can play. So first of all, a lot of people are saying that, okay, China has not done much. It just talk a lot. But actually, China's system is very different from a lot of Western countries. In the United States, you say a lot, especially when there is an election. But in China, usually the government will do a lot before saying anything. Especially in China, like if you say a lot, but if the government have failed to do so, then it can be very embarrassing. So meanwhile, China is right now very cautious and it knows that its role is limited. Because actually, so I think the intention or the thinking is that China believes that not enough role is better than playing too much role and playing a negative role. So China right now is concerned about the boundaries of actions of the external intervention in the region. So for instance, the United States has talked a lot about us and has criticized China as not doing enough. But in the meantime, China is worried about the escalation of, let's say, proxy war in Yemen, for instance. And China believes that the United States' role is only going to worsen the regional security situation. So the airstrikes, for instance, against the Houthi rebels, does it really work? That is something that China is really worried about. And also, I think the third point is that China believes that the extra-regional role or extra-regional power can only play the auxiliary role rather than a major role, because like the extra regional power, they are not the main players. And let's say, first of all, China believes that, for instance, the reason why China can promote Saudi and Iran for the reconciliation is not because China is strong or great, but actually it's because both sides have the intention to talk and normalize the relations, right? But right now it's like neither Israel nor Hamas has the intention to stop, as our two panelists have already discussed about that. They both take very hardline positions. So it means that there is very little room for compromise, right? So right now, I think the tricky part is that lots of extra regional powers hope to see a truce between Hamas and Israel. For instance, a lot of regional powers like Arab countries, for instance, and also United States and China, actually both United States and China wants to see a truce, a stop of the war, of course, for different reasons. But the thing is that the Israel and Hamas, they just don't have the room for compromise. So it's like impossible just to ask China to let them stop directly. That is impossible. And also we have to take in mind that what is the reason for the honeymoon or the close relationship right now between China and the Middle Eastern powers? It's not because they like China or like China is great, but the most important point is that the regional powers, they pursue for strategic autonomy. So they want to make their own decisions. So if China just force them to do this or that, then it's impossible because they are going to be the one to make their own choice. So right now, China knows that its role is limited, but I think it doesn't mean that China cannot do anything. So first of all, I think the role of China right now is to provide some like alternatives. So for instance, you do not have to support or side with China. China never say that, okay, you have to take sides between China and the United States. And it knows that like Saudi Arabia or the Emirates is not going to take your side, but you have more choices at least, right? It's like you can, for instance, eat McDonald's for a dinner, but you can also have KFC for a lunch. So you have more choices and you have more space for hedging. And the second role is that China, I think it tries to make things as inclusive as possible. So I think as Professor Fiodor has just mentioned, right now, a very discouraging fact is that although there are a lot of negotiations, they are like under the table. And right now, let's see that there are some negotiation efforts, but who are the participants? Okay, the United States is there, Israel is there, Qatar is there, and Egypt is there. But the thing is, where is, for instance, Iran? Where is Lebanon? Where is Syria? And actually, they are important actors. And China believes that it's impossible that you just exclude a lot of partners and you just include several actors and you think you can make a deal. And actually, China believes that is why that right now, the negotiation has entered a very difficult period, a difficult stage, because it's not going to work if you try to exclude someone. So I think right now, China thinks that, yes, it knows that it can only play an auxiliary role as an outsider, but it tries to provide platform and let all voices to be heard. So for instance, I think that right now, the interesting part with the ongoing conflict is that you see a lot of, you can hear the voice of a lot of small actors. For instance, South Africa, for instance, Malaysia, for instance, some smaller powers in Europe, such as Ireland and Spain, for instance, and they all try, and also there are a lot of Latin American actors, and they all hope to express their voice. And I think for China, it's not that China is going to take a frontline role or something, but China wants to provide a platform and let everybody to have a voice and let everybody's voice be heard. I'll stop here and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. for your points. I think it's really important how you all try to highlight how China, and maybe there are some questions about how China see the ICJ case, as they, I think, in a verbal memorandum mentioned that they are recognizing the resistance, even by weapon of Palestinians, or about how they see Red Sea and the maritime security. But you mentioned a good keyword, strategic autonomy. Maybe we can call it, or we can think about some other aspects like multi-alignment, but the strategic autonomy is the keyword that mostly used for the European Union to their transatlantic relation. By doing so, let's go to Dr. Dill. Dr. Miller, do you with us? David Miller, are you with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Dr. Miller, sorry. Dr. David Miller, can you hear me?
Okay. I'm here, yes.
The floor is yours. Please shed lights to the preferences of the Western, actually, Americans, or at least Europeans, that how they see the diagrams and the dynamics of the crisis, and what is their preferences.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. So I can talk a little bit about the UK and the EU and the US, but I prefer to refer to more broadly to geopolitics and how the interactions of geopolitics are having an effect on what's happening. I thought that was very interesting to hear from the Russian and Chinese colleagues about the perspectives from those respective countries. I mean, the perspective from it's very difficult actually to talk about the UK in the same kind of way that China has just been talked about or Russia has just been talked about, because of course anyone who is sentient or has a commitment to, what shall we say, the human race or to humanitarian principles or whatever they are, is obviously opposed to everything that the British government does in these matters. So when I talk about, I can't talk about China or Russia in the same way I can't talk about Britain, because I would be opposed to almost everything. In fact, everything that the British government does. So let me put that context first. Of course, the UK is strongly behind the genocide, is involved in training Israeli soldiers, has been involved in sending intelligence flights from its base in Cyprus over Gaza, and so is not just complicit in the genocide, but is an active participant in the genocide. The Special Air Service, one of the elite military units of the British military, is certainly in Cyprus, possibly has itself been involved in Gaza. We don't know that yet. There is a denotice, a censorship notice in the UK press, such that the role of the SAS is not mentioned. The UK, under its new Foreign Secretary, the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, has started to talk about the possibility of recognising a Palestinian state for the first time, and that's a movement which is an interesting step, but we remain in a position of supplying weapons to Israel, of allowing Israeli weapons firms, including Elbit and Rafael, to operate directly inside the UK, subject though they are to campaigns by Palestinian solidarity activists to remove them from the country. And so the role of the UK is a profoundly negative one. It doesn't have exactly the same position as the US, but it is a profoundly negative one, as are many of the European positions of the European countries, including especially Germany. People have talked already about the slightly different role of Ireland, of Spain, and Spain's movement towards being more critical of Israel. But there is no chance and no prospect of the UK government being critical of Israel in any meaningful sense. Although, having said that, I would say that what's interesting is the recent Director of National Intelligence report issued in the US, I think yesterday or the day before, which talks about the liability of the Netanyahu-led regime, and it has been interpreted as indicating that there are those sources within the American elite who want to get rid of Netanyahu and to replace him with someone who is more, I suppose the term would be moderate, someone who wants to kill Palestinians slightly less fast, so to slow down the rate of death and destruction and of the Zionists. Now that's a position which has been there for some time, actually. I mean, some of the demonstrations against Netanyahu, the movements which have been demonstrating against Netanyahu from before the launch of Al-Aqsa flood in October last year, have been funded directly by the State Department. These are effectively color revolution forces inside Israel. So it's clear that the US has been playing something of a double game, or at least some elements of its hierarchy have been playing something of a double game in trying to pressure the Netanyahu government. But at the same time, of course, as everyone knows, Biden is absolutely solid on the support of the genocide. There has been no attempt to curtail arms sales or to even warn of the curtailment of arms sales. There have been some noises about taking a different approach, and there's a red line around Rafah, and the red line, of course, is that the Zionists have to have a plan for what to do with the population of Rafah, meaning presumably they're not allowed to kill them all. So there are minor differences between the Zionists and the Americans, but they are minor. And of course, we have the direct involvement of the Americans now in this supposed peer, and I don't know exactly what's happening with that, but it looks extremely likely that this is not just about aid, but is about installing a US military presence directly off the coast of Gaza. So I would say that's a likelihood. The other thing I would say in terms of geopolitics, though, is that let's remember that the US is a declining power, that we're moving into an era of multipolarity, that powers like China and Russia and Iran and indeed others involved in the BRICS alliance, for example, or the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, organization. These are powers which are on the rise, and the American power is on the decline, as we see with the move away from the use of the dollar in oil transactions. Even the Saudis and the Emiratis, two of the closest US allies, have done this. And of course, as our Chinese colleague was saying, that there are interesting things to be said about that. But we also have, as a result of the decline of US power, of course, one of the key ways in which US power has declined, and indeed NATO power has declined, is the absolute rout of the NATO forces in Ukraine, the destruction, the methodical destruction by the Russians of 3 separate armies constructed by the NATO powers to put against Russia, the absolute destruction of the attempt to sanction Russia, which has backfired on Western governments, especially Western economic situation, which it looks like was a direct calculation of the Americans that this would be the case, to effectively deindustrialize Germany and to actually harm Western European economies. An extraordinary set of circumstances there. So the Americans' power is declining. In the question of the Red Sea, it's very apparent that the Americans are scared of taking on the government of Yemen, or Ansar Allah, or sometimes called the Houthis. And we saw what happened there with the Operation Protect Prosperity, which was first of all launched with great fanfare, following which the US Navy said they didn't have the ships to conduct this operation, following which the Italians, the French, and indeed the Spanish withdrew from the coalition, following which the Americans let it be known that they wouldn't really want to take on Ansar Allah directly, because they were concerned that in response that Ansar Allah might sink some of their boats, and that even in that bit of knowledge, which was released via the New York Times, we see the weakness of America. So these are US naval ships, and indeed, of course, some British ships too, and others, which are floating in the Red Sea and in the Med and other places too, which are supposed to project US power, but which it now transpires the Americans think are simply floating hulks of metal targets for Ansarallah. Now, the Americans, of course, know that Ansarallah can sink those ships. They know that they've got weapons from Iran, but they also, of course, have very good knowledge of the other weapons that Ansarallah has, because they came to the government of Yemen from the large quantities of the Yemeni army went over to Ansarallah in contact with the Saudis. So these are weapons which are being Saudi provided, and of course have mostly come from US manufacturers. So the Americans are very well aware that should it be necessary, Ansarallah can sink boats, not at will, but certainly sink American boats. And that's why, of course, they rang up Ansarallah before they bombed them. They said, we're going to come and bomb your bases. And of course, Ansarallah then evacuated the bases, and there weren't any serious casualties. And these have been largely demonstration attacks. And there's a calculus there on escalation. Now, finally, I'm not sure how much more time I've got left, but finally, I'd like to come to the whole question of moving on from Yemen to the question of Palestine more generally. And I think that we need to see this not just in the context of what's happening in Gaza and even just the West Bank, because, of course, we see, yes, a genocide in Gaza, and we see appalling crimes in the West Bank against the Palestinians as well. But we also see that that Hamas have not been defeated. And let's remember, of course, that what we're seeing in Gaza in terms of resistance is not just Hamas. It's not just Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's not just the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's not just the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's not just the Mujahideen brigades. There are 8 or 9 separate armed groups in action in Gaza, none of which have been defeated and will not be defeated. And so we know that that is itself a military defeat for Israel. And that's an indication that Netanyahu cannot implement the policy he has claimed he wants to implement, which is to destroy Hamas and cause their surrender or their extermination. That's not going to happen. We know that on the northern border, there's a 5-kilometer dead zone created effectively by Hezbollah, which means that there are hundreds of thousands, I think it's 200,000 settlers currently being hosted by the government of Israel in temporary accommodation at the government's expense. We know that Hezbollah has what is called the ladder of escalation, which means that if the Israelis do further bombing beyond 5 kilometers or kill civilians, as they did just the other day, that there will be consequences. And Hezbollah have already shown the consequences. In fact, back in December, when there was an Israeli escalation, they took out 2 Iron Dome batteries, which were beyond the 5-kilometer dead zone. And it showed, and of course, the Iron Dome batteries are supposed to be air defense, and they showed that they had the missiles to simply take them out without any possibility of the Israelis defending themselves against it. So we know that in the circumstances that escalation goes further, that Hezbollah will break out the many thousands of medium-range missiles which they have, which I believe so far not a single one has been fired, all of which are able to reach every single part of the occupied colony of Palestine, every single part. Jerusalem, obviously Tel Aviv, and right down to the south. So we see that escalation is modulating. It hasn't fully escalated. Netanyahu wants to go in. Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the ultra Zionists want to go in, but they want. I mean, people like Netanyahu want the Americans to go in with them. They want the Americans to bomb Beirut, and that they're not currently able to do that. If they did do that, that would be a major escalation, and we would see, of course, others being dragged into that, not least of which would be, of course, further involved for the Islamic resistance in Iraq. 23 separate groups, as I understand it, who have been themselves bombing Haifa just the other day and attacking the Golan, etc., including attacking American bases in Syria from Iraq. So all of that is is part of the calculus. And so when I had my Chinese colleague talking about the negotiations, yes, the negotiations are important questions, but there are also military questions. I mean, I see that, for example, the Russians opened a military observation post on the border with the Golan just the other week. Now, what I don't understand, and maybe my Russian colleague can help me to understand this, is why it is that the Russians are allowing the Israelis to bomb Damascus at will, when I'm presuming a declaration from the Russians that this would not be permissible could stop that. And that, of course, is an important element of the whole question of escalation. If the Israelis are unable to bomb the supply lines of the resistance, meaning both Hezbollah and, of course, the Palestinian resistance, then that would be a major game changer. And so I think one of the questions I have really about this mosaic of relations of force and restraint is what is the role, for example, of China, of Russia, and indeed of Iran. We haven't mentioned Iran so far. Iran has been playing a kind of a hands-off role. Even the Americans are saying that the Iranian government didn't have any knowledge of Alexa Flood, which seems to be the case. So the thing I'm kind of curious about is not what the Americans are going to do, not what the British are going to do, but essentially what are Russia, China, and Iran going to do to help the resistance and to help us move towards the position where we have negotiations on a two-state solution, but where we have an alliance to end the Zionist colony. And I think that's the only thing which is going to bring peace in the Middle East. And I think we should be having an explicit recognition that that's the only thing which will bring peace in the Middle East. It's the end of the Zionist colony. And let's do that in as humane and as civilized and as peaceful way as can be done, but it has to be done, it seems to me. And that really ought to be the objective of all those powers who see themselves as being sympathetic to the Palestinians.
Thank you, sir. You can consider the very important remarks that you mentioned. I believe that we need more than just sympathy to the Palestinians and the situation. This is our first round, and we have a chance to talking about more details about situation. We till now have it kind of views of different perspectives from the different backgrounds. Let's check that we are now more than 31,000 people died in Gaza. More than 80% of the buildings in Gaza turned to dust. 1.8, 1.7 people forcibly displaced from the north of Gaza Strip to the Khan Yunis and the south of Gaza. It seems that there is imminent danger and threat of spilling over of tension in different parts, obviously in the northern border of the Israel with Lebanon and Hezbollah, of course, in Red Seas between Yemen, Houthis, and other part of and in Iraq and in Syria. There are some more dynamics that makes the something like 1,000 election in the United States, Taiwan, and this makes us as the international students and the scholars and the experts, just like our panelists, a kind of hard work to understand that kind of provider of how we can see the day after Gaza crisis, how could it be, what is the prominent image or the situation after the crisis. I know that there is a hard or as mostly oops, can you hear me now? I think something goes wrong. Yes, the situation is hard, and mostly it's hard to predict. But if you let me just go to the next round, and Professor Bakshi, do you have any image that can share with us that how could be the prominent optimum and preferred regional situation, especially in Gaza after the crisis? Based on your point of view, we know that actually all of us are attached to our background. Are you just talking about? Let's go to sorry again. Can you hear me now? Maybe I should change the source of my connection. Can you hear me now? Hello? Any comments? Okay, okay. Thank you. About Russia, Russia have kind of, accepted some kind of groups from Hamas and somehow supported the ISIS case. You mentioned about the hard during conflict. What is the, based on your point of view, I think we are not talking here as an official, as an expert. But what's your point of view that how could be the preferred Gaza situation for Russia in based on the large interests?
Yeah. This is, as I mentioned in my first intervention, many things happening in the world now are watched from here, from Russia, through the pretty specific lenses. And in this regard, the emphasis of Russian foreign policy activities is placed somewhere else, not in the Middle East, for now. Answering the question by Professor Miller, why Russia doesn't stop Israel from attacking targets in Syria, Russian policy in the region, including Syria, has always been very much nuanced and sophisticated, based not only on realpolitik and a certain degree of cynicism, which we see everywhere, but in particular based on the fact that situation in Syria, around Syria, and in the Middle East at large is excessively complicated and combines so many different trends, interests, and various scenarios now and for the foreseeable future, that it's unfortunately not that easy to be linearly clear. Those who can do it, those normally are less involved in other affairs, like we see that the only force in the region which is now following extremely clear line, this is Yemeni Ansar Allah. And that's because they don't care about the rest. They are very much principled people. And we see that it works in a way, and no one knows what to do with them. But of course, it's not how the big power, great power as Russia or Turkey or Iran or United States can behave. Unfortunately or fortunately, that's another question. I think that Russian understanding with Israel, at least until this moment, was based on the what I mentioned before, what I mentioned about what Putin and Netanyahu had in common. Putin, and that is a thing which we can see not only in the Middle East but in general in his approach to the international affairs and to the relationship with different countries. He accepts national security interest by expressed and explicated by countries if he believes that those are real. So if he believes that certain issue promoted by certain country has to do with the national security of this country, he accepts that even if this country is not ally or friend, but because he actually wants other countries to behave in the same way vis-a-vis Russia. So accept and respect our security interest, how we understand them, and we will accept your interest if you say that's important for you, that's vital for you, and we believe that it is really the fact. What he really hates, and that has been seen many times before, including this Ukrainian crisis, he hates when the partner countries, the vis-a-vis, tries to present some other players' interests, security interests, as their own. We had this case with Georgia in 2008, when Georgia provoked Russia, not because Georgia wanted to do it, but because Georgian president at that time, Mr. Saakashvili, wanted to be more American than Americans themselves. And that was absolutely no way to convince Putin that to behave in a way as Georgia behaved was in Georgian interest. That was an interest of the United States. Same with Ukraine. And coming back to Syria and this kind of special understanding with Israel, I think knowing extremely tense and acute, severe relationship between Israel, Hezbollah, Iran, and other different players there, I think Putin has always tried to be very calibrated and cautious, so to say, in cases when he believed that Netanyahu had a point about certain security interests of Israel which should be protected, he allowed that to happen. In other cases, not. And that was this very complicated equilibrium on which a relationship with Israel has been built all the time. Now the situation is different, of course. And now I think that we can add another argument, another reason. Russia at this point, yes, of course, Russian presence in Syria is quite important and plays a significant role. But again, based on the fact that Russia is occupied with something else, I don't believe that Russia can afford to open another battlefield in the Middle East against Israel, for example, or against some actions done by Israel. So that's rather the problem with the overstretch, based on the enormous effort Russia is making in Ukraine. When this conflict, the Ukrainian conflict, will be completed, based on the result, which we don't know yet, I think the Russian behavior in the Middle East will change. And as for to more general issue about how Russia would like to see this settlement, frankly, I don't think that Russia has any clear ideas, as no one else has. But so far, there is everybody prefers to stick to this two-state solution, since I don't believe that anybody believes in that, but okay, this is concept accepted by everyone. And I think that the Russian effort, modest and probably not enough, not sufficient, but still effort to create a Palestinian side as a credible vis-a-vis to others, that's the part of how Russia understands it, that Palestinians should unify themselves before they will be able to act as a credible actor on the international stage. Because as long as relationship between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority is as it is, so the Israeli argument, which they say openly all the time, that actually both Ramallah and the Arab countries, they would be secretly happy to see Hamas to be crushed, unfortunately, we can say that some truth in that can be found.
Thank you for your points. I start from the question that you mentioned and you raised, that nobody knows what should do with Houthis. May I have a note that stop the war? And I think detaching what happening in the Red Sea from what's happened in Gaza is maybe not really helpful. And I think even with this point, we reached to the Dr. Shushu that I think Chinese officials is blaming United States for what is happening in the Bab el-Mandab Straits and the Red Sea. And one of the experts mentioned a 3-no about the China policy toward at least Red Sea and maybe in Gaza. No conflict, no cooperation, no coalition. Do you agree with it? And what is the Chinese preferred image about after the crisis day?
Sorry, so you mean that what is China's image? Or how does China perceive
Preferred, yeah. What is its preferences?
Its preference of the image. Oh, okay. So I think a very interesting point is that people are often saying the taking sides things, because there is a theory saying that right now, actually, like China is a superficial friend with everybody, but not a true friend with anyone. And also people are saying that as long as you keep, as long as your interest is growing in this region, it's impossible that you maintain a policy of not taking sides. And I think right now there is a strategy, and a lot of observers are trying to say and interpret that, okay, China is now siding with Iran, or China is now siding with Hamas or Palestine, for instance, and they are always saying that China is going to take a side. But from my point of view, I think that China does not have the logic of choosing sides, and sides is not like a key concept in our foreign policy. And actually, China has proposed the concept of promoting peace through development, and many people believe that it means, okay, China wants to promote the regional states to work with each other. So they have some common interests, so they have interdependence, and people are saying that, okay, this model but the model is not going to solve every problem. So when we say, we believe promoting peace through development, a lot of people are criticizing China, and they are saying it's just a discourse, but actually it's not going to work. But I want to say that there is another meaning of promoting peace through development. It doesn't only mean that local actors have to work together and have to have more interdependence with each other economically, but also I think it means that China wants to propose the question, why don't we rethink our diplomatic agenda? So what is the priority for the local actors? Do we want to develop our countries and let people, live good lives? Or should we prioritize confrontation with regional actors and invest everything just fighting each other, fighting our neighbors? And I think the most important point about reconciliation between Saudi and Iran is not to show, how great China is. Right now, China is more popular than the United States. That is not the most important point. I think the point is to show that there does not have to be confrontation in the region, right? In other words, we may not assume that there are sectarian camps and we have to take sides. So the assumption is not like that. It's not like, okay, there are sectarian camps and you have to take sides. But China thinking that maybe actually we create this kind of confrontation at the very beginning, but they don't have to be there. So today, even if you So that is the first point. And actually, I think China is taking this method not only in the Iran-Saudi case, but also in the Palestine-Israel case. It's like, so I think China is thinking that many extra regional powers are trying to only make things more complicated and only make the confrontation worse. And on the other hand, another point I would like to add is that today, I think it's very hard for China to take sides or choose sides in the region. It doesn't know how to do so. And I think Professor Fyodor is right, is correct when he says that he thinks Palestinians should unify themselves. And I think that is not only for the Palestinians, but also the Arab states, for instance. So right now, is there a position or a unified strategy among the Arab states, and how do they perceive the issue? Right now, it's like the Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape is becoming complicated. And the region does not only have two camps, like on the one hand, there are the Arab countries, on the other hand, there is Israel. But it's like, regarding the conflict, like what do the Arab countries think of it? Till now, the most active actors are the non-state actors rather than the Arab states, right? So where is the voice of the government? What do they want? And actually, right now, I think the normalization, the process of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel is still ongoing. So it's like even the Arab states, they do not step forward to form a camp against Israel. So in this case, when there is not a unified Palestine, when there is not a unified voice among the Arab states, and many of them actually they want to work with Israel. So in this context, so it's very hard for China to really take a role to stop the war, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your points. Maybe it's be an important question for China's grand strategy that how this kind of engagement is going to happen, or even it's going to happen or not. But let's go to the Dr. Miller about, as Mr. Fiudo mentioned, about the two-state solution, that it seems that there is no favorable solution, not for the Palestinians. About 86% are disagree with the two-state solution, as well as Israeli people. How could be the future of the crisis, based on your points? And of course, the role of European, actually Britain.
Well, I mean, the reason that there's no unity in the Arab world is because of American imperialism. The reason that Qatar hosts Hamas is because the Americans told them to host Hamas. The reason that Qatar has 13,000 American troops is an insurance policy against a Saudi invasion. The Americans have troops in every country, including illegally, of course, in Syria, and against the will of the parliament in Iraq. So we're not talking about the Arab states having a variety of views, which is confusing. We're talking about the role of the Americans. The reason the Saudis are, and of course the Emiratis, want to normalize is because of their alliance with Israel, and two, because of American pressure. So if you are an actor in the world geopolitics, then you must recognize that. This is not to do with the Arabs just being, disputatious with each other. It's to do with external power relations. And that's what has to change, because, of course, we're moving to an era where the Americans are less powerful. But that needs a little helping hand along the way from a number of states who might have an interest, even if they have an interest where they do not want to replicate the prior power politics of the US empire. So I think that that's the first thing to say. Second thing to say, yes, of course, Palestinian unity and Hamas is working on that, and I believe also Fatah is working on that. But of course, there's a difficulty, which is the comprador elite of the Palestinian Authority, which directly collaborates with the Shin Bet and with the Israeli police and military. And that's a real obstacle to Palestinian unity. And of course, that's in part fostered by the subsidy which is given to the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, by Israel, but also by America. So we can't get out of this power politics arena, whereby the role of America in particular is important, and that needs to be faced up to. I think, Hamas still refers to Qatar as a brother nation, and I think that's a mistake from Hamas's point of view. But even the Qataris, who are perhaps outside the axis of resistance, are perhaps the most sympathetic, are willing to talk about being pro-Palestine, but they're not willing to do anything because they're in a power matrix, which makes it very difficult. Just like Erdogan in Turkey, who is willing to talk a great game about Palestinian rights, but is not willing to do actually anything at all to stop the massive trade in fresh fruit and vegetables, which is keeping Israel alive. It's not the Emiratis and the Jordanians and the Saudis who are allowing the breach of the embargo imposed by Nasrallah. There is some breach of that embargo over the land route, but it's Turkey which is supplying the vast bulk of the fresh fruit and veg, which keeps Israel afloat. And so and of course we know that the reason for doing all that is that Turkey is part of NATO, and all of these countries are in a power matrix. They're not independent actors. Yes, they should be independent actors, and yes, let's hope that Chinese and Russian foreign policy, and indeed Iranian foreign policy, can encourage independent action. But that means a break from the American empire. It means taking the kind of approach which countries like North Korea or Venezuela or Cuba and others take against American empire, and that's not looking like it's very likely in the Middle East at present. And the role of great powers in that circumstance ought to be, it seems to me, to encourage independent action, like you've been saying that the Chinese want to do. But independent action means that they'll have to find a way to break from American power. Now, this can't happen tomorrow, I suppose, but that it has to be the long-term tendency. And in terms of the two-state solution, the two-state solution is no solution. There is no possible solution to the Palestinian conflict, except for the end of the Zionist colony. It has to be eradicated. It has to be removed. It has to be destroyed. Israel has to cease to exist, and there has to be a Palestinian state, one Palestinian state. And if the Jews want to stay, they can stay, but they cannot continue to pursue genocide against the Palestinians, which is what Zionism is. They have to abandon Zionism. Zionism must be decommissioned as an ideology of the world, in the same way that Nazism was intended to be decommissioned after the end of the Great Patriotic War, as it's called in Russia, or the Second World War, as it's called in the UK. And of course, Russia, and to some extent America, Russia was the best at engaging in the process of denazification after the Second World War. The Americans did a bit. The British and the French weren't at all interested, which of course is why in the UK, for example, we imported 8,000 Ukrainian Nazis in 1947, put them in camps, and a year later just let them go. So we have to have a proper process here where states in the global system have to face up to the fact that Zionism must be ended, that Palestine must be de-Zionized, and that's a responsibility of all of the world's powers, not just those of the Middle East.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bakshi, are you with us? Can you hear me? Professor Bakshi? Okay, I think maybe we can find him later. I think as everybody is mentioned different angles about the crisis, and there is a unwritten rule in international relations that there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Let's find the best solution in the upcoming days, and using our other guests' point of ideas. We have His Excellency Ambassador Sultaniye. If he wanted to, if Dr. Sultaniye, they wanted to mention or raise any point, you have the floor. Of course, we have Dr. Majid Afshani, our director at GPTT. Of course, you, and of course, Dr. Miller. Sorry, Dr. Deal. If you wanted to add anything, we have about 20 minutes to share, and if, of course, other participants, they can leave comments or ask questions at the Q&A box, or can raise hand to. Okay, yes, Dr. Sultani, you can enable your microphone and webcam and share your idea with us.
Well, first of all, I just want to commend you, and I prefer to talk tomorrow. I really congratulate your panelists with very eloquently explaining the issue. Perhaps I touch upon some of the issues tomorrow that we are really facing a deadlock, and how we can come out of it. I prefer to, in fact, listen and learn from very knowledgeable panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sultaniya, for accepting our invitation, and being with us is so much, priceless for us. Majid, do you want to add any comments, or Dr. Emamian, our co-founder at JPTT, if you want, both of you wants to add anything, or other participants? Do you want to add anything? Can you? Yes, Mr. Lukianov, you can.
Yeah, I wanted to build up a little bit on what Professor Miller said. First of all, it's quite easy to blame everything on the American empire. We in Russia know very well the role of this country in shaping or misshaping the world, no doubt about that. But I think for many governments, in particular in the area, that's a very comfortable excuse. That's American empire. What we can do, we should. On the one hand, I understand this is a real politics. So every country cares about its own interests. So there are no idealists so much in the international affairs. And by the way, Iran, I think it's one of the most brilliantly pragmatic countries, despite all problems surrounding Iran. Russia is trying to be pragmatic, not very successfully each time, but still. And basically, I think it's normal. But it's normal, and you should be aware of that. And the level of hypocrisy about who is in charge, not me, should be, to put it mildly, should be limited. So the frank approach, manifesting interests when there are interests or there are no interests sometimes, then I think it's better. And secondly, of course, the policy by Israel, and especially by this particular government, which includes elements which are most radical I ever saw, creates a lot of doubts about the future of this state. But I think if we state, as Professor Miller did, that the solution should be to remove Israel from the Middle East, it's a non-starter, because it's impossible to be implemented, even if we would believe that it's good, that it's right. I don't think it's right, because at the end of the day, the solution should be based on realities everywhere. And the reality there is that there is a Jewish state, Jewish population there. And as if you try to remove it, then it's the very simple. Then we it means that it should be a permanent big war there, as long as we can see ahead of us.
Dr. Majid, do you want to add any comments?
May I, Ali?
Of course, yes.
Well, hello everyone. Ali, you did a very great job. Actually, it's very hard to actually collect such esteemed panelists together on one scene. Congratulations on this. I would like to know more about the U.S. role in the short term of this crisis. Maybe some of the panelists can explain more and elaborate more on the effect of the upcoming elections of the U.S. and what's the impact of this election on this crisis. So far, Trump maybe will be the next U.S. president regarding the polls and surveys, and the difference between the Joe Biden and the Trump policy on this issue. I would like to learn much more about from every panelist who would like to point out to some analysis regarding this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And if anyone of our panelists have any conclusion and last remarks, the floor is yours. Just can enable your microphone and use the podium. Dr. Mills, do you want to add anything or respond to question?
Did you say me?
Yeah. I said, do you have any comments about what mentions about your point of view about Zionist state necessity in a region, or what Majid mentioned about the future of U.S. role in the Middle East?
Sure. Well, I take the point about blaming the Americans, but look, there is no possibility to resolve the conflict in Palestine without one of two things happening. One is my preferred solution, which is the end of the Jewish state and a one democratic state for all citizens of Palestine. And the other, I'm afraid, is the elimination of the Palestinians. It's the genocide of the Palestinians. This is how settler colonies work. They either have to, I mean, there are some cases in between this, but they either have to eliminate the natives or they have to be decolonized. And the examples are stark and visible to us all. America, of course, is the biggest example of the former, of the elimination of the natives, but also Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. Algeria is the most thoroughgoing process of decolonization, where the French, bête noire, left after exacting a horrific toll on the Algerian people. There are some median cases which are, I guess you would say, in process. South Africa is closer to decolonization than is, for example, Northern Ireland, which remains a kind of settler colony in stasis. But there are two poles for the ending of settler colonialism. There either have to be the extermination of the Palestinians or the liquidation of the colony. It doesn't mean the liquidation of the Jews. It means the removal of the Jewish state, a state which specifically gives people rights depending on their Jewishness, whether one calls that a religion or an ethnicity or a nationality, and gives specifically rights to any Jew anywhere in the world to go and live somewhere which they refer to as having a birthright to live. So people born in Birmingham or Bristol or London or New York or San Francisco or Moscow, who happen to fit the definition of Jewish, are allowed to go and steal land from the Palestinians in Israel. Any Palestinian who's not there has no right to return, no right to have their land back. And that is an intolerable situation. There is no way of solving that problem without, as I've said, one of those two ways of doing it. There is nobody here in this meeting, I believe, who wants the first solution, the elimination of the Palestinians, the transfer or the elimination of all the Palestinians. Nobody wants that. And the only other alternative is for the Zionists to be defeated, I'm afraid. There is no two-state solution. The Zionists have made sure of that by the massive settlement building operation they have done since 1967. And so, these are stark realities. Will it cause a massive war for the foreseeable future? Maybe, but maybe not. The Algerian case is the massive war pole. The South African case is the counter example. It depends how it's organized. If the world powers together oversee this process, there's a much higher chance of it being achieved relatively peacefully, which is what I would hope would be the case.
Thank you, sir. Just a last question to Dr. Shushu, and of course, is her last and conclusion points. Does China, I ask it again, does China have any interest or plan to engage in a political and security mechanism, or we can say preferences at Middle East, by considering China's national interest and its limitation?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. First of all, I would say that we have to look at China's own intention and China's own capacity. And when we talk about its intention, for instance, right now, as you have already mentioned, China has growing interest in the region. But on the other hand, to what extent it has also to consider to what extent is it allowed to engage in the security, security dimension. Well, of course, there are some cooperation. For instance, there are the arms sales from China to a lot of regional powers, and also there are a lot of certain kind of cooperation, but it's not going to be. I don't see that there is a possibility of going up of a big role of China in the military sphere in this region, because so first of all, for the United States, it's very complicated, and as we already know, there is a confrontation, or there is a competition between China and the United States, and of course, the two big powers have a lot of things that they can debate about, and there are more important issues for China, like the Taiwan issue, etc. So I don't think that China wants to confront the United States by, for instance, creating any military bases in the region, because it's not its first priority, and it doesn't want to take the risks. And secondly, the risks also come from the local actors, because China wants just to do business with everybody. And if you have the military bases there, then that is going to be a very dangerous thing. For instance, I give you an example. So, for instance, China has a big presence, not in the Middle East, but in the Horn of Africa. For instance, China has a growing presence in Djibouti, and it has already created problems for the relationship between China and United Arab Emirates. There are a lot of disputes over that. So let's imagine that if China has a growing role in the military sphere in the region itself, then it's going to be a big issue. But China itself, it doesn't want to displease any side right now in the region. So I don't think that is the priority in its foreign agenda. And lastly, as we have seen right now, there is the Red Sea crisis, and as I have mentioned, right now China itself suffers from the loss. But even so, China is very careful, and is very careful to say, okay, we have military presence in Djibouti. So why didn't China just use this kind of like power? But it's difficult, right? Because it doesn't want to escalate the proxy war there, and it doesn't want to put itself in a confrontation, in a problem, in the big power struggling in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your interesting and important remarks about China policy and grand strategy and, of course, limitation. Dr. F, yes, Mr. Fyodor, just in a very short moment. Yes.
Maybe a very short remark answering to the question about the U.S. Future role. Of course, it's not up to me to analyze, because we have now pretty limited contact to our American friends or former friends. But I think that in case of Donald Trump, of course, we can expect much bigger public effort to support Israel, because Donald Trump, when he was president, he demonstrated very clear commitment. His commitment is based, as everything he is doing, is based on a business-like approach, on the commercial approach. And as we saw during his first presidency, and many people say it, even in countries which are not very much in favor of the United States, that Donald Trump was the first president since many, many years, if not several decades, actually, American president who didn't start any war. So he is exceptionally peaceful for American standards. And so he speaks like a person who now will start fighting, but he never does it because his idea is business. But just this idea will probably force him to try to use all means, maybe secret means, hidden means, to be back to this Abraham Accord policy, which means to try to, even after what happened in Gaza, try to sideline the Palestinian issue again, in order to bring some benefits to Israelis and Gulf monarchies for establishing relationship with Israel. That's the question, whether he will be successful. Sorry to say it, probably I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think that there is a pretty good precondition on the side of several Arab elites to listen to this and to follow this idea. But the question is that now we have actors which would certainly try to undermine it. On the one hand, Houthis, whom we mentioned already, and I don't believe that Americans and others will be able to do anything to them, actually. And on the other hand, of course, I would not overestimate the role of public opinion. But obviously, international public opinion is very much against Israel. It's no doubt about that, and it's increasing. So I think that Trump will need to use all his magical Titanic business talents to try to bring this old approach back. But certainly he will do it. The important thing about hypothetical victory of Mr. Trump in the United States is that in this case, I guess that the US state apparatus will be so much paralyzed by severe internal struggle, which will erupt immediately. Because for many people on the other side, the Trump victory is not just a defeat, is existential disaster, as perceived as it. And I think that might be, for all of us, that might be a positive thing, that Americans will simply totally consumed by their internal fight, internal struggle, and that will give some opportunities for others.
Thank you for your proficiency, kind of, and of course, how you are articulating the U.S. future and Trump and the election, of course. Majid, do you want to add anything? And if it's not, we can wrap up the session.
No, so far it's a long session. Just a yes and or no question answer. Is Trump have more leverage than Biden on Netanyahu, Mr. Lukyanov?
You know, that's a very long discussion, I'm afraid. No, we have no time, and we need very good specialists on that. In general, I think that there is a paradoxical situation that leverage of the United States and Israel is now less than leverage of Israel and the United States, which is paradoxical because we see that the public opinion in the United States is changing, is shifting towards much less pro-Israeli stance, but the political establishment and both Republicans and Democrats, they are more and more inclined to be totally behind Israel. And I think that Netanyahu is skillful, or Israeli people, Israeli strategic thinkers, they skillfully use the connections they have, and it's not so much about particularly current Israeli politics, but they use this image of Jewish people being victims of everything, and that creates a very strange situation for the United States political environment, and that is part of the general something in the United States which we cannot grasp yet. So back to your question, I don't believe that Trump will have more leverage on Netanyahu. What is clear, he will be less inclined to use the leverage he has, because Biden is trying sometimes. Biden will not do it because he will be most likely entirely pro-Israel.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
I have just two final questions. One of them for the Chinese colleague and the other for the Dr. Miller, if I'm not wrong. For the Chinese colleague, right now, a year has been passed from the Tehran, Riyadh, actually Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. And everybody knows about the role of China regarding mediation of these agreements, which we should dedicate another session about the result of this agreement and the progress of this agreement. China did a major role on that issue. It is a issue connected to the Middle East. But regarding the Gaza crisis, we see that China is moving backward, actually, and do not really want to intervene in this crisis. The world order is changing. Everybody is aware of the changing order. And you yourself mentioned that negotiation about the ceasefire, about the end of this crisis without Iran is not realistic. Does China wants to do something to make other actors part of this negotiation, or just want to leave it for the region and try to just see the region as a energy suppliers and as a market, and it's not now the time to intervene more in this regard? And final question to Dr. Miller, which is a very short question, but it has a long answer. Is there any end to this crisis? What's your prediction? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks so much for your questions. I think the first issue about China's role in Gaza compared to its role in Iran-Saudi reconciliation. I think these are two completely different stories. The first thing is, as I mentioned, China believes that itself it's not the decision maker, but it plays the auxiliary role. So it means that if, for instance, if Israel and Hamas, they don't have the intention of ceasefire, then it's impossible for China just say you should stop. Even the United States can't do it. And so that is where its limitedness comes from. And the second thing is, I think we also have to take into consideration the perception of the United States, because the United States has been very clear that Israel is something very different from Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the United States doesn't want China to play a role. And it's a paradox because on the one hand, it has always, criticized China for not playing enough role in the Gaza crisis. But on the other hand, actually, according to our own conversations with the colleagues in the United States, actually, I think the United States doesn't want China to touch the issue, especially when it is related to Israel, because they think it's their core interest. And the third issue is what leverage does China have? Because like Iran, Saudi Arabia, like China is at least a big buyer of oil, right? So China has at least some kind of like leverages, so it can play some kind of like role, although not a big role. But regarding the Gaza issue, is very different because, so first of all, we have to admit that in Gaza, actually, it's not a war between Palestine and Israel, but it's a war between Hamas and Israel. And Hamas is a non-state actor. And for China, it has a foreign policy principle, which is not to deal with the non-state actors. So you see that China has very limited knowledge and relations and interactions with all kinds of non-state actors in the region. And the outcome is that right now it's very hard for China to take any leverage over Hamas, for instance. It doesn't have a great impact. It's not even like Qatar or Egypt. So that is the reasons why it's very different from Iran, Saudi Arabia. And also it's very awkward for Chinese government to just interact with non-state actors directly, because China doesn't want the other powers to interfere with its own non-state actors. And the other question is whether China is making some efforts. I believe so. And I think it's talking about some kind of like inclusive conference, for instance. And also, for instance, maybe the international organizations can also take a role. For instance, there is BRICS, there is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and Iran is part of them. So maybe this kind of like international organizations can at least let their voice to be heard and add to the nuances of the geopolitical landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, how is it going to end? Well, we don't know, obviously, but the only possibles, it seems to me, are that the Americans and the Israelis can find some kind of way to stabilize the situation. It looks like that's a very difficult thing for them to do. They're not going to defeat the Palestinian resistance. They're not going to be able to go significantly into Lebanon, I wouldn't have thought, without there being obviously a massive escalation, and very probably the Zionists will be beaten by Hezbollah unless the Americans were involved directly, in which case that would be a further escalation, the result of which we cannot tell. Obviously, the Zionists want to expand from the river to the sea, as they say, and they want to take Lebanon and Syria and part of Iraq right up to the borders with Iran. Some of their maps include also parts of Turkey being part of the Greater Israel. So that's the ambitions of a section of the Israeli elite, and whether the Americans would go along with that, It remains to be seen so far, but it seems very difficult for them to stabilize the situation, because the longer it goes on, the more difficult it will be. It does appear to be the case that they cannot defeat the resistance in Gaza, no matter what they do, so we'll have to see what will happen. What I would prefer, as I've already said, is for the peaceful dismantling of the Jewish state and the creation of a Palestinian state and a democratic process whereby everybody who lives there and all the Palestinian refugees get to vote, and that would result in a Palestinian state. There's no doubt about that. And that would be a democratic way of resolving the problem. Of course, not a democratic way which would be supported by the much vaunted advocates of democracy in the UK and the US and Germany. But that's what I would say.
Thank you, sir. Majid, would you like me to wrap up the session?
No, thank you all the panelists. It was an informative and fruitful discussion from the humanitarian perspective. Actually, the history is right now being written, and we all as mankind has a duty, has responsibility to stop this genocide. It's far from the talking about the international relations aspect of the real politics and what's the gain and benefits of each actors at the states, at non-states actors. Actually, many things has been changed. One of them is that you should, as a state, even as a state, you should think about the non-state actors, and because our region is full of them, and all of them has some kind of ambitions and intentions, and the sphere too has impact. I would like to thank every panelist, every participant on behalf of the Governance and Policy think tank here in Tehran, and at the first of the Ramadan month, holy month of the Muslim world. And yes, to my understanding, this discussion was very in depth, was very fruitful. We should actually conduct a full report of this session. Hopefully tomorrow we have had another chance to talk more and learn more from the other participants. Everybody welcome for the next panel tomorrow at the same time. Tomorrow, for sure, we have Dr. Sultaniye, other participants. And yes, from my side, let's keep this dialogue among experts without any limitation of the official talks open. Let's keep to talk to each other, learn from each other, and help the understanding among these challenges everyone is facing in the world more clear, more reasonable. And we are here to conduct such a platform for everyone to talk about these issues frankly, clearly, and make and try to actually make the connections among the experts' view more and more near to each other. I would like to thank you, Ali, for this panel and the next day panel, which is very interesting, very esteemed and prestigious women and men would be with us tomorrow. Thank you, and that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Majid, for your comments and your points. If you let me, I just want to the topic of our session, just wanted to borrow a term from one of my professors that is mentioned, the vacuum of power in Middle East, and we can see the lack of willingness, the different priorities and costs that leads to the current situation that, as it mentioned during the session, we are witnessing a kind of inaction, and I do believe that inaction is a kind of action. And without addressing the root cause of conflicts, there is no chance for persistence, peace, as we can see it through history. Thanks for being with us, everybody, the participants, our dear and distinguished guests. We try to keep and enlarge this kind of network. We are going to at least try again, build bridges and provide platform for dialogue. As Majid mentioned, we had a chance to speak about this issue tomorrow. And just again, happy Ramadan to everybody. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.